Alright, so cameras just like the Sony FX30, the Sony a7 IV are great, but they all suffer from one major problem. And it's not sensor size. Calm down. But what it is a lack of built-in ND filters. Now, when you have your exposure and maybe you're shooting outside, you might notice that things are a little bit bright, and you have to either turn up your shutter angle or you have to do something to your aperture in order to get a better exposed image. Now, ND filters nowadays are meant to do that, however, a lot of the times they have weird color casts or they degrade the quality, and overall it's just an experience that's hit or miss sometimes. But Freewell just came out with a multi-filter system that's not only going to help you out with your ND features, but it's also customizable and has some cool tricks to it as well. So in today's video, we're going to be talking about the Freewell K2 system. It's modular, it has VND in it, and it also has some other tricks that you might not know about. Let's talk about it. Now, getting into this unboxing, I'm not a big person for the design of packaging, but this actually looks pretty good. Now, when you open this guy up, it's going to have a couple of different things that are super useful. One is it's going to have a little card that you could actually go and get a tutorial on how to set this guy up if you're new to the system entirely. It also has a booklet that shows you all the different filters and what their effects are and what they would be used for, which comes in handy because there's more filters that go in the system than whatever comes in this box. On top of that, you get this cool little kind of carabiner clip thing that I'm assuming is going to come important later, but I don't really know yet. I'm just opening this. Now, it's also nice about this packaging that it tells you everything that you need. So if you're somebody that really hasn't gotten to an ND filter system or filter system of any kind, you might not know exactly what everything comes with. Now, with opening up this box, the case that comes in here looks immaculate. It's a kind of patterned leather. It kind of reminds me of like a Peter McKinnon hat, but it is something that's going to hold the entire system of filters and the actual apparatus itself it is that you need to get onto your camera. Now, there are supposed to be a couple filters inside of it that I'm assuming are part of the big ring that's on the actual system, but it does come with a 6 to 9 stop ND just in case you need a little bit more darkness in your exposure. You do have these adapter rings. Now, what these are for is basically every one of your lenses are going to have different filter threads on them. And Freewell actually gave you the rings that work with 82, 77, 72, and 67 in order for you to get them on the majority of modern lenses. Now, the Freewell system also gives you the ability to have rectangular filters to go into the system, and they gave me 3 of them. One is going to be a gradient ND, which I'm really excited about and we're going to talk about later. One is going to be an anamorphic streak filter, and the other one is going to be a diffusion filter that's kind of like a glimmer glass or a Tiffin Black Pro Mist. So we're going to test all these out in this video, but here's the entire kit that they sent me. So I should probably tell you the second thing before we get into the setup of the Freewell K2, and that's I literally got it yesterday. I've had this thing for less than 24 hours. It showed up on my door, so we actually just might be learning some things together because I haven't had a ton of time with it. But for the most part, filter systems are pretty straightforward. Now, when I did open up this package, I was a little bit concerned because on the front of the box, it says there's 4 filters. There's a 1 to 5 stop ND, a 6 to 9 stop, a circular polarizer, and also going to be a 32 polarizer as well with the ND. And I only saw 2 filters. But then I realized the genius. These filters, they're double-sided. Basically what that means is that on one side of one of the ND filters is a 1 to 5 stop, but when you flip it around, it's a circular polarizer. And on the other end, the 6 to 9 stop is a 32 ND polarizer as well. And I honestly didn't know that, and I probably should have just read the manual. But if you are alarmed that there isn't 4 filters and there's only 2 of these guys, just know that you just flip it over and you get the other functionality. It still might sound a little bit confusing because how do you just turn a filter on one side and then it has ND, and on the other side, it's a circular polarizer? And I think I have a way of explaining this. Now, on the actual system itself, there is a base level of ND that's on there, which means that there is a piece of glass that's already on the system before you put the variable ND filters on there. And if you guys aren't familiar with what variable ND filters actually do to get that exposure, is it's actually 2 pieces of glass that spin in opposite directions in order to make an image darker or make an image lighter. And what ends up happening is, I think, if you take this little thing off, if you take off this base ND that comes with the system itself, you flip the filter on the other side onto the system itself, you're going to get that alternative feature. So if on one side you want to use the ND filter, you just got to put this guy on. It's magnetic, which is nice. But if you want to use some of the other features like the 32 stop ND, or you want to use the CPL that's on there, you just have to take it off, which is really nice. Now, setting up the system does have a lot of moving parts, but it's actually incredibly easy to do. Now, step number 1 is to make sure that your filter adapter is set up. Now, depending on the focal length you're using and the filter thread that it has, there's a corresponding adapter from a 67, 72, 77, or 82 millimeter filter thread. Not only does it clip into the system, but it also screws in as well, so it is really secure and it's really hard to fall off your lens. Now, after this, everything else is easy because all the filters in the system are magnetic. So if I want to put on the variable ND filters or I want to do the CPL thing, I could just stick it on the front of there and it sticks on via a magnet, it rather than having to screw it in. Now, there's one thing that I was a little bit confused about when I saw this in the media kit after I read it halfway through this video. But basically there's these things. Now these little flaps on the side open up, and it was a little bit weird and confusing. I thought that's how this actually stuck onto my lens, but it gives you a little space here. I don't know if you could see it, but it gives you a little space here that you could actually put the rectangular filters into here. Now I do have a bunch of rectangular filters that came with this kit, so I can get some unique filter combinations by being able to use 2 filters at the same time. I guess it's now time to see how each filter performs and overall whether or not I recommend this thing. Now first off, we're going to talk about the variable NDs. Now it's something called a true color, which means that it's not going to get that weird color cast that you might get out of other ND filter systems. Now the way that I'm going to try to test this is I'm actually going to put it up against my Sony FX6 and the built-in NDs that are in there, and then I'm going to take the ND off and then use a variable NDs in order to find out, is it actually true color or is it actually just a gimmick?
So this ND filter is a little bit interesting because it does have a true color, quote unquote, when you're at the low end of the ND filter. So I did try the 1 stop at 1 to 5 stops, and then I tried 5 stops at the 1 to 5 stops, and I got slightly different results. Now at the lower end, it does actually look pretty on par with the Sony FX6, and there isn't a ton of difference there. Obviously I had to adjust my exposure and my aperture, but more or less the colors and the quality look pretty much the same. Now on the flip side of things, when I went to 5 stops, things moved a little bit more magenta. And the same is true when I went from 6 stops on the low end on my 6 to 9 filter, and then when I went up into 9 stops on the ND filter against the Sony FX6's built-in NDs. Now I have a theory that's not really a theory, but if you lean the actual ND filters into the light, you'll notice that there's a purple tint. And a lot of variable ND filters nowadays lean more on the green or a little bit on the yellow side of things. So I think what Freewell actually did is they made the tint of their filter a little bit on the opposite, so when you mix that in with ND, it meets in the middle and you get a more neutral image. However, when you add a lot of ND, when you're at the higher ends of the stops of your ND filters, you're going to start to see a little bit more purple or magenta into your frame. Compared to the Sony FX6's built-in NDs, which, I mean, it still leans a little bit green, even the Sony FX6 image itself, you might find a little bit of neutrality by using something a little bit more magenta, but honestly, just be aware of it, and you can always pull things back in DaVinci Resolve or your editing program.
Now right away, it might not look like much, but circular polarizers do 2 things. One, it helps get rid of unwanted reflection. So if you're getting a shot on a car windshield or against a piece of glass and there's a glare there that you don't really want, circular polarizers are actually made to be able to do that. And on top of that, it helps retain your highlights. So if you are getting a shot that's up into the sky and you have some ND, sometimes with ND filters, you still might have highlights that aren't necessarily retained, and circular polarizers are able to bring some of that highlight information back. Now there is one more thing that's not commonly known about circular polarizers. Because it has the ability to retain a lot of highlight information, when you're lighting a subject for an interview, documentary, or whatever have you, using circular polarizers actually helps out with getting better skin tones. So when I'm doing a side-by-side shot with just using ND on its own and then using a circular polarizer, you're going to notice that I'm going to retain a little bit more information in the highlights when dealing with somebody's skin, which actually comes in handy when you're working with people that are magnificently melanated. Now with the 32 ND CPL, this is where you're going to get the best of both worlds. You're going to get the properties of controlling your exposure with ND, but you're also going to get the highlight retention qualities of a circular polarizer. So you could always use this with a camera like the Sony FX30 or anything else that doesn't have built-in NDs. But with a combination of both, I actually think I would use this on my cinema camera as well. Oftentimes with the built-in NDs, sometimes I can't get all the highlight information that I'm hoping for. So using something like an ND CPL, I could also use my ND filters to compensate if it is a little bit too bright still, but I still get the best of both by being able to expose for my highlights and at the same time be able to control the overexposure in my image.
Now the Gloomiest filter, unsurprisingly, rhymes with ProMist because it has a very similar effect. Now, diffusion filters help lift up the shadows and takes off a lot of that digital edge. Now in terms of the Gloomiest in this filter, I do wish that I got a little bit more contrast in comparison to just using the lens on its own. I'm a big fan of diffusion filters and I do use a glimmer glass, which I'll compare the Gloomiest to, but the glimmer glass does a lot better of a job in retaining the contrast into my image while still lifting up the shadows, where the Gloomiest has a little bit more of a stylistic look because it lifts up everything. Now going along with the theory of tinting different lens filters, this lens filter does have a little bit of a yellow tint when you shine it in front of the sun, which actually makes a lot of sense because while using this filter, I do get a slightly warmer look. It's a little bit on the yellow side, and I think it actually has some really good applications for like a vintage look, or if I am outside and I want to get a little bit more warmth. However, it does take a lot of that darkness in your shadows out. It does lift quite a bit, so you have to be prepared for that. Now, my landscape shooters know all about graduated ND filters, and it's kind of like a half ND, where the top you're going to get the darkest part of your filter, and then it gradually tapers off to make sure that it doesn't affect things that are on the ground. Now, you're going to want to check out these shots. Now, the very first shot, you're going to notice that the top is really blown out, it's super bright, albeit the FX30 doesn't have as much dynamic range as like an FX6, but when you put on a graduated filter, you're able to bring down the exposure at the lights that are going to be at the top of frame. Now, this is really good for me, especially when I'm shooting in gyms and other natural light locations, because oftentimes I want to get more exposure out of the windows and cameras that might not have the dynamic range, but at the same time, it affects my entire image, which is something I don't necessarily want all the time. This is actually one of my favorites. I don't really have a ton to say about it, except this one is the favorite lens I'm gonna have. Now, this doesn't come with the actual set itself. You gotta get this separately, but this would be the first purchase that I would get.
So I did mention that the Freewell K2 system does have a lot going for it, and in fact, I think it solves a lot of problems. Now, I like the fact that it's a modular system. You can attach a bunch of filters and a bunch of combinations, and it's also magnetic, so it makes it easy to switch between filter to filter. But that's not necessarily it. Now, there are other systems like the Polar Pro or the Tilta Mirage that work really well in terms of having different types of filters into the system, but here's the thing. Sometimes I just don't need a matte box, and I just want to have a filter system that works with my camera, but I don't want to have a large footprint. And obviously you could put the matte box bare bones into a bag, but that just means that you're opening the door to potentially break the thing. And I break a lot of things. I also like that it's convenient, it's magnetic, I could change between different filters, I could use different combinations, and at the same time, it does also solve the problem of compactability while still having a great ND filter feature. Now, you might be thinking I could just go to a regular ND filter system and that solves the compactness, but not only are you not going to get the customization, but when compared to another ND filter that's just a circular portable one, it does still have that color cast with it, and that's something that I'd like to avoid, and Freewell actually addresses by making a true color system. Now, I do think I've pretty much covered everything I wanted to talk about in terms of the Freewell system, but I do have one more filter that I've left out, and that's going to be the Anamorphic Filter. But it's kind of hard and not that fair to try to do that in the daytime, so I'm going to wait till night and I'll show you a couple shots and give my overall thoughts about using this filter with the system.
Now, I'm going to be honest, from having anamorphic lenses, the streak filter isn't necessarily my favorite, but I could see how some people like this look. Now, first of all, every single flare is going to be blue or a color that's really close to blue. Even light sources that aren't blue are going to have blue streaks to them. The only situation I found that didn't have a big blue streak in my frame was when I put it in front of a red light. And honestly, for some people, that's actually a really good thing, and some people like that look. For me, it's not my big thing. I like a lot of subtlety into my anamorphic look and into my flares, and I find those a lot more pleasing. Now, something I wish that this could be improved on is if maybe there was a little bit more subtlety in the actual length and the intensity of some of the streaks in the filter. I don't know if that means that you have to kind of reduce the amount of streaks that are across the board, but I find when I have multiple light sources, I don't necessarily want everything to have blue streaks. I might just want a couple of different light sources every now and again, so each time you do see that flare, it's a little bit more special, where on a streak filter, it's going to happen all the time in front of a light source. If you do want to use something like this, I would use it in a more controlled environment, so possibly a set where you have control over your light sources, but I wouldn't necessarily take this down the street and hope that you're going to get a lot of subtlety or flare colors that are going to be exactly what you're looking for. So in controlled environments, this might actually make a lot of sense, but during this photo walk at 11 o'clock where I should be sleeping, maybe not.
It's Wednesday, my dudes. All right, so we're the next day, and honestly, we're like an hour before we're supposed to be posting this video. But I'm gonna break this all down, but here's the kicker for this video. I didn't have to do this. In fact, when Freewell sent this to me, they didn't actually need a full dedicated video. I straight up just wanted to see if I could do it in less than a day. And well, here we are. But anyways, all the filters in here are great. I do like a lot of the square customization filters for different looks. And in terms of the true color ND, I do find at the lower ends of the stops, I don't really have too many problems in terms of the color representation. It usually just is around the higher end or at the ends of each of the ND stops, which truthfully, I can come back from purple rather than coming back from green in my opinion, but to be honest, it does a really good job. Now, one thing we didn't talk about was the price, and it's a pretty fair deal. Now, if you want to get this today, the day of launch, the super early bird price, you only have to pay $349.99, which for getting 4 filters in a system like this is a pretty good deal. Now, if you wait a little bit longer, you're probably gonna have to pay $50 more. And if you wait too long, you're gonna end up paying $150 more than the $349 price tag that it came with. Now, that might sound like a large sum of money, but if you think about systems like the Polar Pro matte box system, or even the Tilter Mirage with a couple of filters, it starts to add up around that number and actually goes even past it. Okay, so my last clip kind of messed up a little bit, but what I wanted to say is that the K2 system by Freewell isn't available directly this second. Freewell did send me this for the Indiegogo campaign, so if you do want to check that out, the link is down in the description down below, and you can save a bunch of money by going to any of the early bird pricing. Now, if you want to save some money and you want to escape the problems of your current ND filters, I think the True Color is a system that works really well for you. That being said, I actually managed to complete doing a video in less than 24 hours, and it actually isn't the shortest video in the world, so send it a like if you made it up until this point. Now, I'm going to go and load this. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, or at the very least you learned something, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace. I didn't think of a thumbnail for this.